orphan couple. And they lived in this shtetl, and it so happened that this orphan boy and this orphan girl, who were not related in any way, shape, or form, but ended up working for their common employer. And as they say, there was a boy, there was a girl, it was Gvar Shidduch. They kind of got interested in each other. It wasn't like today's day and age. They didn't go to Yorkville and hang out or anything, but they decided it would be a good idea to maybe think about getting married. They had similar backgrounds. He had no parents, she had no parents. Anyway, as they say in Yiddish, it says Gvar Shidduch. They decided they were going to get married. Now their common employer was a very, very generous and kind person. He decided that he would pay for the wedding. He would pay for the wedding. Yosem and Yisema, it's a very big mitzvah. Achnasas Kala in general is a big mitzvah to help people make a wedding, but especially here where there was an orphan, 2 orphans, makes it an exceptional mitzvah. And so he decided that he would pay for the wedding, and he gave this young man and young woman a sizable amount of money, and he said, go to town and buy the things that you will need to be able to set up a home. Whatever they need, a quilt, some kind of mattress. I'm sure the flatware was not exactly beautiful silver or china, but enough to be able to have a modest dwelling together. I'm saying that this is connected to this time because you may have seen there's articles, I think in the Times of Israel was the last place I saw this, but it's, in Yiddish it's called a schwarze chasana, it's called a black wedding. And a black wedding in Yiddish euphemism meant that at a time of an epidemic that they would make a wedding between a orphan boy and an orphan girl, and the merit of doing this mitzvah would bring about good things for the community and society at large. And the story goes that in the 1918 Spanish epidemic, this was actually done by the Jewish community in Yerushalayim. There was social distancing, whatever they called it at the time. They weren't allowed to be together, and there was a whole story how they put this wedding together. But they did make a wedding like this, and shortly afterward, the epidemic dissipated. So you can't go wrong by helping orphans get married. You can't go wrong by that. Whether or not it's going to end this whole COVID mishigas, I don't know. This disaster we're dealing with, but this is what's being talked about now. And we believe in the power of mitzvahs, and we believe in the power of Yiddishkeit, and who knows? Could be. This is the thing that's needed to bring about an avalanche of a difference. This whole situation came really almost out of nowhere. Although when you have the hindsight in 2020, people could start to predict, and people said they could have seen this happening, but I don't know. I didn't hear this from somebody else. I was living here as you were living in this world, and we didn't see it happening. We didn't see it coming. I remember even Purim, there was one shul in Toronto that closed, and it was like this mystery. We couldn't believe it. A shul would close on Purim, like we canceled the Purim activities. What's going on? We couldn't wrap our heads around it. Less than a week later, everything was shut down in town. Anyway, so the story goes that this very, very generous employer gives them this sizable amount of money, and the young couple sets out for the big town where they could purchase these things. And on the way, there was a little bit of forest you had to go through. In this area of, somewhere on the Russo-Polish border that was always switching back and forth, but at that time it was under Polish dominion. And they were waylaid in the forest by a group of bandits. No, I'm sorry. Story, they got through the forest, no problem, and they come to town. And when they come to town, and they hear this tumult, it's like a big tumult going on. And they said, what's all the excitement about? And they said that there's this family that had rented a property from the local landowner, the local duke, local squire, in Yiddish or Polish it's called a poretz, and they couldn't make payments. And because they couldn't make the payments, they were now being thrown into a pit. A pit was the euphemism for the dungeons that these landowners who had tremendous power. They had their own little armies, their own little police force. They really reported to nobody. They could do as they pleased. Poland did not have a formal royal family. There were various dukes, the archdukes, and various nobility, members of nobility, and a member of nobility would be chosen to be the king of Poland, but it wasn't passed on necessarily from parent a child, and some of these squires or dukes they wielded enormous power over enormous swaths of Poland, and some of them were very small little fiefdoms. Maybe they had a small troop of armed soldiers, and they were essentially the de facto ruler in the area in which they resided. As long as they didn't start up with the king, they could really do as they pleased, and they did. And the Jewish people were at their mercy, as were many of the Polish peasants, the serfs. And if these people were desolate individuals, most of them, they were not necessarily refined individuals. They were party animals, and they made a living simply because they owned everything. So they would have people rent out the properties, lease the properties, and they would get paid, and they don't have to do anything to make a living. The problem was, of course, when you couldn't make the payments. So we have this couple, family, actually a whole family that's now being led into a deep dungeon, a deep pit, and there's nobody has to guard the place because you can't escape. You're thrown deep into the ground. There are no windows. Once a day, food is thrown down. Either food is thrown or either is not thrown. When a family went into a situation like this, a pit like this, you either did come out or didn't come out. It was not a good circumstances. Very, very, very dismal circumstances. And this is what's happening. There's this Jewish family that's being led into this grub, as they called it in Yiddish, this pit. So the young man and woman looked at each other, and they said, how can we go and make a wedding and celebrate when there's a Jewish family that's literally going to be ruined, and maybe even, who knows, they might even die. So they said, how much money? How much money do they owe? They said, oh, it's a huge amount of money. It's a whole year's lease. How much money is it? So it turned out that the money that was required was just about exactly the money that this very, very generous employer had given them to make a wedding. And the young man looked at the young woman, and the young woman looked at the young man, and they said, you know what? How could we think about ourselves and prepare for our future life when we know that we were here, we had cash in hand, and together they decided that come what may, if they wouldn't be able to get married and set up home, then it would be delayed. They could not turn their backs on the need of this very, very destitute and unfortunate family. And so they came forward and they said, we can pay. Who are you? It doesn't matter who we are. We have cash. And they had a bag of money, and they paid the Duke's representatives, and the family was set free. And they ran away before anybody could thank them. They don't want to be thanked. They didn't want the attention. They don't want to be put in an uncomfortable position. And most importantly, they didn't feel really it was almost not their money. The money was given to them for a specific purpose, and maybe the landowner would be upset. And they figured, listen, we had to do what we had to do. And if the landowner will not give us more money, we understand. He's not obligated to give us anything. He's under no obligation. So they came home and they couldn't bring themselves to tell the truth because they felt uncomfortable. So they lied. They said that we were waylaid. A group of bandits in the forest came and stole all our money. We're terribly sorry. We're happy we escaped with our lives. And don't feel obligated. It's not your problem. It's not your issue. It's an act of God. It's an act of God. Maybe we weren't supposed to be able to set up a family. Maybe we weren't supposed to be have a marriage. Who knows? The employer was a very, very, very generous and sensitive man, and he thought to himself, "How can I look at this young man and woman that had such unfortunate circumstances? And they were waylaid, and they were robbed. How can I go around living?" And he literally scraped the bottom of his barrel, and he gave whatever he had. He said to the couple, "I guess I was supposed to lose the other money, and I want you to have a wedding. For me, it's very important. You both work for me. It'd be a big privilege for me that you'll have this wedding." And he gave them almost an equal sum of money he had given them originally. They were, of course, totally overwhelmed and very, very touched. They couldn't thank him enough. And the story goes, they went back to town, and this time they did purchase the things they needed, and they came back home, and a wedding date was set. And the entire little shtetl, how many people could have lived in the shtetl? No. People think like the shtetl looked like Fiddler on the Roof with all kinds of different people doing all kinds of different tasks or chores. My dear friends, there were many, many little settlements of Jewish people who lived. Some of them made a living through some farming, and maybe somebody had a mill, or somebody else had a tavern sometimes for guests that would come through. Some of these shtetl didn't even have a minyan. Some of them had a minyan, a little shul. Not many of these little settlements didn't have a rabbi. They had itinerant preachers who would come by and teach them Torah on occasion. I don't know how big or small the shtetl was, but it was a shtetl, and clearly there wasn't a big marketplace there. There was no malls. When they needed to buy things to get married, they had to walk a few hours to go to the local larger town. And when there was a wedding, like in Fiddler on the Roof, the whole shtetl participated. I don't know if there was actually a rabbi in town or not, or if they sent for a rabbi, but at any rate, a rabbi was present, and a ketubah was drawn up, and a wedding, and they slaughtered a goat or a sheep, and the whole town participated in preparing for the wedding of this orphan boy and girl, neither of whom had parents, and everybody felt that this was like their personal simcha. Tremendous joy, tremendous happiness, and the villagers felt blessed to be able to do something like this. Within an hour of the chuppah, all of a sudden a carriage shows up, pulls into town, and a very venerable looking rabbi alights from the wagon, and he says, "I received news of the wedding. The chassan, the groom, he is a long lost nephew of mine. It's long lost. I didn't even know my younger brother died. The whole thing is a shock to my system. I just received word, and I'm here to participate in the wedding." Wow. The orphan boy never knew he had an uncle. He was so shocked, and the uncle hugged him and kissed him, and he said, "I'm so happy to be here to celebrate at your wedding." And the next man gets out. He doesn't look as venerable, but also a fine-looking, scholarly man, and he claims to be the uncle of the bride. I said, "I didn't know I have an uncle. No, I'm a great uncle, but I'm an uncle. I'm Isa." And so he was the uncle, and the next one comes out, another rabbi, and he's a cousin of the chassan, and a fourth rabbi comes out, and he's a cousin of the kala. So the whole town heard this. It didn't take very long the news to get out that this bride and groom actually have relatives, and uncles, 2 uncles are here, and his cousins are in here. And this, of course, energized the simcha, and it was even greater joy and even greater happiness than it was before. And for here, the little wedding scene you saw on Fiddler on the Roof will probably fit perfectly, except there's no program at the end. Everything went very nicely. But it was the custom in Poland, Romania, the area called Bessarabia, probably parts of Ukraine also. The custom was that at a wedding, all the wedding gifts would be announced. And this way everybody who came, it actually was young couples would be able to start their lives. Where were they going to get the equivalent of today $50,000? How do you start life off? So everybody would give. These weren't wealthy people, but everybody in the shtetl would give. They would give something. And that's how young couples would start a life off. This is how it was. What would they give? Oftentimes they didn't have extra money. One had an extra pillow, and people would pluck chickens and save the feathers. They give a feather pillow. And somebody else would give maybe, somebody was raising goats, he had an extra goat, he'd give them a goat. And somebody else might give a blanket, somebody else might give a pot. People gave different gifts. Sometimes it was new gifts, sometimes used gifts. Everybody gave. This is how it was. This is how Yidden lived. They lived generously, they gave freely, and people cared about each other. So it came to time to announce the gifts. They said to the uncle, "What are you going to give? You have to announce the gift." So the uncle said, "Announce that I am giving the village, that village where people go shopping, that village belongs to the Duke, and all the stores and the shops are leased, of course. I give the village, that parcel of land, that whole area, that little tiny municipality, I gift it to the chassan." Everybody burst out laughing. It was ridiculous. How do you give the Duke's village? They thought the man is probably destitute. He doesn't have any money. He's being nice. What should he's making a joke. So it was very funny. So everybody laughed and it was humorous. And they went to the uncle, the purported uncle of the Kala. So what do you give? He says, "I am going to give, there's a mill not far away from here, and the mill belongs to a particular Duke, and I'm giving the mill." Give me the mill. It's ridiculous. And so it was. And the next one, the cousin, He said he's giving the river. There was a little river, and people would pay, I suppose, a fee to go fishing there. He's giving the little river, little stream. And the other one said he was giving a field. There's a field over there, a little farm. He's giving a homestead. Okay, it was very humorous. It was very strange in the villagers' eyes. But people took it with a sense of humor. And that's how it was. The wedding came to its conclusion. And as they say, everything was happily ever after. The never before seen uncles got back into their carriage with the cousins, and they rode off in the dead of the night, and nobody was wiser, and nobody ever saw anybody again, and that was the end of the story. Now, this very, very generous employer, I guess he was the wealthiest person in town, he felt that they need to do something to help this couple, have to start life off. So he gave him an option of employment, opening up like a little satellite of whatever he was doing. And he had some kind of farm, some kind of and he gave them, the people in town arranged, it was a little bit further away from the town, in an isolated place, but there you can start up and, maybe you work your way up and eventually be able to move back to town. Anyway, the young man and the young woman were delighted with each other, and they were just so happy to be married to each other, and they were so thankful to the villagers to have been provided for them. And they went off to their way, and they began their life together. And they both worked hard, and, they put bread on the table. One night, in the dead of the night, there's a knock on the door. It's late, maybe 9 or 10 o'clock at night in the winter. There's furious knocking on the door. The young man opens the door, and there he sees a fellow wearing hunting garb. His eyes are bloodshot. His face is blue with cold. And he's near exhaustion, about to collapse. And he begins to speak as quickly as he can, and the words are tumbling out of his mouth. And the young orphan can make some sense out of what's going on. Apparently, there's a son of a local duke, and he went hunting, and it's winter, and the carriage had gone over an area that was covered with ice, and they didn't realize it wasn't on the actual road. And the ice had broken, and they fell into a deep ravine that was filled with ice and water, and the horse was there, and the wagon had fallen there, and the young duke could not extricate himself. And he had worked for hours, and barely managed to pull himself out of this, and he was looking for help. He said, my master, the young prince, is going to freeze to death. He's going to freeze to death. I don't even know if he's alive anymore. The young man put on his large woolen boots, like big socks. When I was in Russia, I saw this. It's called volikas. Today they have little galoshes on top of them. Those days just wore like his big heavy wool socks, wool boots. And he put on his fur jacket and his fur hat, his shapka. He took the largest lantern he could find, and he was a sturdy young fellow. He took rope, and I guess what you would, the equivalent of today's day, bungee cords or whatever else it was, the things you need to try to pull something like this off. He had some basic tools, and he went off. He went off with the servant, and they found the ravine, and the young man did a yeoman's job, and with tremendous effort, he managed to schlep this guy out of the pit, and the young man was barely alive. The young prince was barely alive, and he schlepped him back to his house. And in the meantime, the young woman, the young orphan wife, had prepared some porridge, and they brought the alcohol, and they rubbed his body with alcohol, and they wrapped him in blankets, and he spent the night in that house. And the next day, they left. Of course, the Duke was going out of his mind, terrified of what had happened to his son. He was overjoyed to see his son, and they brought in a local medical team, and the doctor said he would be okay, and he wouldn't even lose his fingers and his toes, despite the frostbite. It would take him a few weeks to recover, and with good rest and care, in a few weeks he'd be back to himself. And so it was. In a few weeks, he was back to himself, and the Duke, who was delirious with joy that his son had been saved, threw a ball. These dukes are not such busy people. These dukes and the ladies, whatever, they went to parties. Threw a huge ball, invited all the local nobility from far and wide, And the guest of honor, well, the guests of honor, these people were no special lovers of the Jewish people, but still you had to appreciate what this orphan boy and orphan girl, they saved his son's life. They were the guests of honor. In that part of the world, alcohol flows freely. I'm not talking about Bartanura, that's like ginger ale for these people. They drink hard ale or hard vodka, and that's how you party. And the party, that it was intense. A lot of drinking, very, 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 a very heavy party, as they say. They partied heavy. And somewhere in the middle of the night, the Duke got up and he said, "I am ever grateful to this young couple, and I am going to award them a prize for saving my son." He said, "There's a little village, and I own the rights to everything in that village, and I gift this village." Now, of course, unbeknownst to this young man and woman, at the wedding, it wasn't an uncle who showed up. It was the holy Baal Shem Tov. And it was not cousins or uncles of the Kala. These were 3 Talmidei HaBaal Shem Tov that the Baal Shem Tov took along with him. All great tzaddikim. And the Duke gifts the village, the very same village that the Baal Shem Tov had gifted at the wedding. The Duke gifts the village to this young couple. And after that, the next Duke gets up and he's drunk out of his head, and he doesn't want to be outdone, not to be outdone. He says, "I'm so grateful, my best friend's only son. This is a very, very, very big deal. I have many mills." He says, "1 mill less is not going to make me or break me. The mill that I own," and it was the very mill that the Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov had given to the Kala, he said, "The very mill, I gift the mill to this couple." And so it was. The next Duke gifted the brook, and the next Duke gifted the farm, the homestead, and this was this is how the party ended. And as the Baal Shem Tov later explained, that in the merit of the tzedakah that this young couple gave, they gave everything away, such mesiras nefesh, a young orphan children, and here they are, and they had a few dollars which they never could have anticipated or expected, and they gave it all away to save a family. The Baal Shem Tov said, in the merit of this, that's why Hashem had paid them back, and that's why they did indeed live happily ever after. This is the story. So, as I said, it's a story which is a little bit related to